Hello, welcome to the Caspio webinar on Introduction to Triggered Actions. My name is Jason Johnson, and I'm the Manager of User Education here at Caspio. Today, I'm going to be reviewing our newly released feature, Triggered Actions. Now first, let's go through our general agenda. Initially, we are going to go through a user interface tour, and in this tour, I want to show you some of the different tools and blocks and how the Triggered Action Builder functions. It is a drag and drop interface, and you'll find it very similar to the previous logic type builder that we have in our system. Next, I'll be going over some basic tips and some best practices that we recommend before you create your triggers and while you're creating them. Then I'm going to go through the trigger implementation demo. We're going to go through a few different use cases to show how triggers can affect data in different tables. Finally, I'll be taking different questions and posting a little interactive question and answer session at the end. Now please, if you have questions throughout the presentation, enter these into the chat window, and myself and my team will review them as we go. I also want to give a special thank you to everyone out there. You, our customers. We've recently been named a leader in the New Wave report from Forrester. This is specific for low-code platforms for business developers. It's through your different feedback and options and things that you've given us that we've been able to push the platform to the next levels. And finally, throughout this presentation, we're going to be going over some new features. So if you need additional help or additional resources, please visit our how-to online documentation. As well, our support team is always available for you to reach out to them directly via phone, chat, or even support tickets. And finally, if you feel a need for more of a one-on-one type session or need a little more detailed assistance, expert sessions are available by request. Please reach out to our customer success team or our support team to schedule those. So now what I want to go into is first define what are triggered actions. Triggered actions are going to allow data manipulation and calculations through the construction of different application logic using a visual interface. You're going to find that this visual interface is going to be very similar to the logic criteria currently used in our system. Now, these triggered actions will be able to execute on specific events to perform the different functions on data in your tables. These events will be adding new records, modifying existing records, or deleting a record. So let's begin going through our general user interface tour. First of all, what we need to take a look at is which table do I wish to base the trigger on? Now, these triggered actions are going to be modifying information in the table. And in my case here, I'm going to choose my invoices table. To access triggered actions, you can hover over this, select more, and click on triggered actions. This is going to bring up a screen that'll list any existing triggered actions you may have created previously. As you can see, I've created a few in advance of this session, but we're going to be building a few from scratch. So to create a new triggered action, I select a new triggered action, and it will then load up the visual builder. Now I want to spend some time stepping you through the different components of this builder so you can get a better understanding of what tools will be available. The first thing you need to consider when you are creating your triggered action is on what event do you wish this action to execute. I can select the different events via this dropdown, and as you can see, I have the option for insert, update, and or delete. I can select any combination of those. For now, we're going to keep it simple and we'll leave it just to insert. Now, we need to next define what action I wish to run on this event. In this particular case, my event is inserting data into my invoice table. So you'll see on the left-hand side many different options, menu options. I'm going to choose my actions option, and this is going to give me the selection between being able to delete from a table in my account, insert data into a table in my account, or update data in my account. So I'm going to select right now insert into, and it's a drag and drop interface. So I grab it, drag it in, and to connect it, I'm going to move it close, and as soon as I see the yellow indicator, I can release, and it places it. You're going to see as well different options for these actions and different blocks that when you right click on them, you can pull up and have specific different options available. If I wish to duplicate, disable, delete, and so forth. Also, some of the different blocks are going to have a gear icon. This gear icon is designed to modify the behavior of that block. For example, in my insert, I have the option where I can add a select statement to it. Now, the actions are going to be really the backbone of what this triggered action will run. Now, what I want to do as well is run through the different options that you can use in the tool section to modify or really change that workflow. So first of all, we're going to step through some of the data options that are available. Now, the data blocks that you see are going to be designed to retrieve value from other tables or for just general definition of constants to be used throughout your trigger. So as you can see here, I have a block to choose fields, different fields, and I even have a select block if I wish to select stuff from a different table. As I scroll to the bottom of the different options, some of these you will see in some of the following tools as well, but I have options to maybe define a static string or a number or a date. Another block we have are the logic blocks. These are going to allow you to go through and set conditional blocks. These can be used as criteria to filter or to modify the different trigger workflow. As you see on top, I have an if-then type block available. I'm also going to have different comparison types of these different blocks that I can insert into, allow criteria, or allow just general change of logic. The next set of blocks to quickly review are going to be our text blocks. Now, this is going to be your general static text constants, but also has different tools for string or text manipulation. You can see I can declare on top a static constant, and all the way at the bottom, I even have options for concatenation. Similarly, we're going to have tools to use for numbers. I can once again define my static numbers, but I'm going to have arithmetic type options as well. So this equation type block, where if I want to multiply different numbers or different fields or something of that sort together. I'm also going to have more advanced mathematical options available that I can choose to insert. And finally, the last set of blocks you'll have available are going to be the date options. So this is going to allow your date manipulation, or once again, a selection of static date values. As you can see, I can set the static value. I could have it set a timestamp, and I even have options, maybe if I want to do the difference in years or whatever particular date format I wish between two different dates. Making use of all those different tools, those different blocks, are going to allow you to create some very custom workflows. We'll be displaying and demonstrating later on in this presentation how you can go about building out some of these different use cases. But first, before I get into any of that, I'd like to go over some general tips and best practices that I recommend when you're looking to build any of these triggered actions. So let me go back to my tables screen, and we don't need to save this. So first of all, these triggered actions are designed to manipulate and change your data. So you want to make sure that you have a backup of that information before you start trying to create any triggers. I myself recommend going under Tools and exporting your entire application. That way I have it as a whole. If for some reason I made a mistake, I can then import and replace the whole app. But least of all, I would recommend making an export of your tables themselves, just so you have that data. The last thing you want to do is be working with live data, creating some sort of a triggered action, and something unexpected occurs and you lose that info. Ideally, I do recommend, if at all possible, to work with test data when you're going through and working with the triggers. Many times this makes it a lot easier to have more predictive type behaviors of the triggers when you know what information you're handling. Another key thing to look at before you start creating any of your triggered actions, or really for the matter of building any of your applications, is to look at your relationships. Now, for our use case today, I'm going to be using an invoice type system. And in a moment, I'll go over more specific the use case. But I want to focus right now on why relationships will be important for triggers. When I'm creating different triggered actions, many times I want to use fields or access fields from other tables. You're going to have the availability in the triggered actions in those blocks to use join type behaviors. If I've already defined a join between two tables, so for example, my items table joining to my invoices table by item ID, it's going to pre-populate a lot of those fields and really simplify the overall build. And as we go through the implementation, you're going to see that much more in action. Now, what I want to review before we get into our use case implementation demo, and the big part of what I think everyone is here to see, is I want to go over the use cases. So I have many other tables created here. In our case right now that we'll be building, we're not going to be making use of those tables. We're going to be focusing on the invoices and items. The first use case I wish to demonstrate is I want to do a calculation on insert of information based on values from a different table. So specifically, when I create an invoice, I want to enter in a quantity ordered. I want to take quantity order and multiply it times the cost per unit and immediately stamp and store total cost. That is going to be the first use case we're going to create with a triggered action. The other use case I'm going to explore is when I enter in a quantity order for my invoice, I wish it to immediately deduct that from my inventory on hand. So if I order 25 of item A and there was 50 initially available, I want the inventory on hand to reduce to 25. Also in that case, I want to try to account for if for some reason my quantity ordered is more than what I have on hand, I want to flag this record right away as back ordered. As well, if the quantity order is less than what's on hand, I wish to do that math where it does the adjustment of inventory. So let's go ahead and jump in and let's create this first triggered action. So come back to the tables. Our first choice is, what table should I base my trigger on? Well, as I'd said, we're going to be basing this on our invoices table. So if I hover over and click on triggered actions, I'm going to have the list of my existing triggers, and we're going to go ahead and start by building a new triggered action. I need to ask myself at this point then, on what event do I wish to have this trigger fire or execute? As I defined, I wish to say on insert of data into my invoice, I wish to do some sort of an action. Now the action in this case is I'm actually looking to update some information. So if we go to the actions block, and choose update and click and drop that in. We now need to choose which table are we looking to update. Now this is going to be a key concept that you're going to see throughout. I'm looking to update the information being inserted into the invoice table, not the information that already exists in the invoice table. So specifically, I want to be updating the total cost that's being inserted. As you can see, as soon as I select my table here, I'm going to have access to those fields selected here. If I had wished to access more than one field, I could select the add option and add additional fields. And if you wish to remove those, I'm going to quickly show you 3 different ways to get rid of a field that you maybe added accidentally or a block added accidentally. First, I can click, grab it, and simply drag it to the trash. Next, I can select it, right click, and choose delete. And finally, I can highlight it and hit delete on my keyboard and it'll remove it. So that's 3 different ways if you do insert a block or something you need to remove that you can quickly get rid of it. Now, one other thing to point out, you can see when I added my update action block, it immediately added a where clause. Now, if I wish to remove this, because in this case, I'm not going to use any criteria to filter records, I can select the gear option and then unselect my where clause. And you'll see it removes it, and I'm left behind with this piece that I can simply remove. So now we need to define how are we going to get total cost. So total cost is equaling, right now it's trying to say a static value. But as we had said, we wanted to define that as total cost will be the quantity ordered times the cost from the item table. So first I will need to grab a number field and grab the block for our equation. You can see, similar to when I drop the action block in, as soon as I see the yellow indicator, I can release and it places it. Now, right now, this is trying to do static math. I need to actually do math between 2 fields. So I click on data, select field, drag it and release. And then I can go and select another data field and drag it and release. So let's create our equation. We had said total cost will be our quantity ordered multiplied by the cost per unit. Now you can see right now, when I go to set the cost per unit, that option is not available in my dropdown. That is because it's in a different table. So I will need to join to the other table to have access to that field. So I'm going to select my gear icon and add a join. Now, since we had gone through and done all that hard work to create all those relationships in advance, it actually populates based on that information. Now in our case, I don't need the other joins. The only join I was looking for is to join my inserted table by item ID to the items table by item ID so that I have access to the cost per unit. So for now, I'm going to remove these other joins that aren't going to be used. You'll see now that I have created this join from this dropdown, I have access to the field items cost per unit. I can then select that. So let's quickly refresh what we've so far created. We have defined that on insert to the invoice table, I wish to update the information being inserted, particularly the field total cost, and I wish total cost to get the value of the quantity being inserted, ordered, multiplied times that associated cost per unit. And I have access to the cost per unit field because I have created the relationship between these two. So before we go and test out our quickly created triggered action, we're going to have to validate this block. So if I click on validate and give it a moment, it's then going to test it out to make sure there are no errors. Now, please note, you would need to, when you're going to save any triggered actions, make sure that there aren't errors occurring. So let's quickly simulate what would occur. Say if I didn't create my join and I left this parameter of my join empty. If I try to validate in this case, you can see it highlights that block. And if I select, it actually spells out requires more parameters. Well, that's because I left this one blank. I'm not going to be able to save this until I correct this error. So I'm going to go ahead and replace it, revalidate, and now we can go through and save. Now on save, we can go ahead and name it, and let's call this new on insert, calculate total cost. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now that it's saved, it takes us back to our list of the different triggers. And before we test it out at the table level, we need to enable the trigger. At this point, I want to point out, you can only have a single triggered action enabled per event. So you see I have right now on the top here, 3 different triggered actions that are set to occur on insert of a record. If I try to enable more than one, it's going to give me a message. So let's first, if I enable this, and then I try to enable another, it will give me a message. Now, due to that, we need to consider when we're building our triggered actions that we may need to combine or stack multiple actions inside a single event. I'm going to be showing that with the next use case so you can see an example of exactly how that builds. But for now, let's go ahead and let's test out our calculation of cost. So first, let's take a look at our items table. Let me refresh it to make sure it's current. And what we see, very simple information. 1,000 of each on hand and a cost per unit. So particularly, let's look at item B. It says they're $5 per unit. If I go to my invoices table, let's create an invoice. Now to point out, I'm not doing this via a data page right now because I wish to show you how it's directly affecting the tables. You very clearly could create a data page to do this and have the trigger execute. This is just for our sake of our example. So I'm just going to insert some of the test information. And let's order 150, and I choose item B. So my desired behavior as soon as I submit this is that I wish it to calculate the total cost for item B based on the value of $5 per unit from the other table. So if I select, you'll see it has created and stored that total cost as we expected, 5 times the 150. So that's our first general use case. What that demonstrates is the ability for you to create a triggered action to get a value from a different table to do a calculation. Many of you may see multiple different types of use cases out there to build something like this. Now, the other half of this, though, we want to take a look at is now that I said I wanted to order 150 of this item, I wish it to update my inventory on hand correctly, subtracting the 150. And correcting my item B's inventory. Now I'd also said, if for some reason the amount ordered is greater than the amount on hand, I don't want it to take these negatives. I don't want that calculation to occur. But what I do wish to occur is I wish it to flag this, check this box as backordered, and maybe put some sort of static reason for why it is backordered. So let's take a look at building out that particular trigger. So I'm going to delete what we have there for now, go back to our triggered actions, and we're going to create a new triggered action. Once again, we now need to step through and ask ourselves, on what event do I wish to have this run? For consistency right now, we're doing everything on insert. So I'm saying on insert to my invoice table, what am I looking to do? I'm looking to update the item table. So I'm choosing update, and then I change this drop down to my items table. Now that I've set that to the correct table, I can look to actually configure which field in particular in the items table, or if I had wanted multiple fields, do I wish to have updated. Now it happens to be inventory on hand is the top value in this dropdown, so that's why it showed by default. If it was a different one though, I could click on the icon and actually select a different option. Now we need to define what should inventory on hand calculate and get. I need to once again add a number block, and I'll need to add fields because we are once again looking to do some math between two fields. And then I need to define these. So I want inventory on hand to get the result of my current inventory on hand minus the inserted quantity ordered. Once again, what we see is I don't have access to the quantity ordered field. So I'm going to need to join to another table. I select my gear icon and I choose join. And it inserts my join. And to point out here, my first thought may be, okay, it's getting the value from the invoices table. So then I could come under here and actually say inventory on hand minus invoices quantity ordered. But this is not quite correct. I don't want the value that exists in the invoice table of quantity ordered. What I need is the value that is being inserted. So I will have to actually modify my join and point that at the inserted table. Now I can see that I'm actually getting the inserted quantity order. So it's what is being submitted to the table is what I wish to have subtracted. Now, when we were defining our initial use case, I had said I wish to limit this calculation to only run when I have enough on hand to fulfill that order. So in this case, we are going to make use of the where clause. And in the past, you've seen me a few times go to the data and copy and drag over a field block. I'm going to just duplicate it in this case, and I can select and drop it. Once again, it leaves behind the piece that I will simply remove. So now I need to define my where clause. So my where would be, in this case, my inserted, my quantity I'm ordering needs to be less than or equal to what I have on hand. So let's once, like we did previous, step through how this entire triggered action is constructed. We have defined that on insert of data to the invoice table, I wish to update the items table. In particular, I want to update the field inventory on hand, and that should be updated with the result of this equation. This is our existing inventory on hand minus the inserted, the data being inserted of quantity ordered. So again, we had access to the inserted quantity ordered field because we had created a join between our items table and inserted data. And finally, I added a where clause that when this where clause is true, this action will occur. So if I have 100 on hand and I try to order 1,000, it won't do this result. So let's validate this and save it and go ahead and test it out. So we'll call it new on insert, update inventory. And we'll go ahead and save this. And if I now go to enable our new trigger, it's going to say, oh, another trigger is currently enabled for the same action of insert, update, or delete. If I click show details, it specifies that was the one we just built. I'm going to go ahead and say enable my trigger, and what it'll do then is it'll disable the other. So let's take a look again at our different tables. I have my items table, my 3 different items, and I have the different quantities of each. For right now, all 3 of them have 1,000 on hand. If we take a look at our invoices table, it currently is empty, but we're going to create a new invoice. So let's say 400 of item A. So my desired behavior here will be the items table, the inventory on hand, should be deducted by 400. If I submit this, you'll see the total cost didn't calculate this time. That is because that trigger has been disabled. Let's take a look at our items sheet and refresh. And there we see inventory on hand is reduced to 600. Let's do one more submission to test our where clause. Remove these. And we saw there was 600. Let's do 1,500 of, say, item B. If I insert that and I go to refresh, you'll see it did not calculate it. Now, that's exactly how we had defined our triggered action and defined our where clause, but that could be a little confusing to my users. I saw that I submitted my invoice. So this now is going to be the second half of this user use case, is I wish when this occurs, I ordered more than what I have. I want to check this box back ordered, and I want to define some sort of static reason that fills into here. So we need to, in this case, edit our existing trigger. Now, if I created another triggered action on insert to do something else, as you can see, we run into this conflict of my events. So what I'm going to do is edit our existing, and I'm going to add another piece, another action to this trigger. Now, the action we're looking to do on the insert of the data is, once again, I'm looking to update information. This is very similar to when we were doing the total cost. So if I choose actions and update, and I can select and place this above. Now please note, triggered actions are going to run top down in order. In my case here, because of my where clause, that's not going to make as much of a difference. But in some use cases you may create, you may want to have some sort of hierarchy to how they run. So take that in consideration when you start combining multiple actions. Now we need to ask ourselves, what are we looking to specifically update on this insert? I'm looking to update the data being inserted. So I'm looking to update that checkbox, that back-ordered box in the invoice. So I choose inserted. I then select my back-ordered field. In this case, it'll say smart detect that this is a yes/no field, so it should associate it to a Boolean, a true, false. A check will correspond to a true. Now I also want to add the static reason, so if I click on add, and then choose my back order reason, I can enter in a text value here. So we could say quantity ordered greater than on-hand inventory, something static like that. Now we need to define our where clause. I wish this to only run where the amount ordered is greater than what I have on hand. So first, let's begin forming our comparison and remove the extra block. So I'm saying where my quantity ordered is greater than inventory on hand. And what do we see again? We see I don't have access to the inventory on hand field. So when you run into that case, just think to yourself, well, click on my gear icon, let's create a join. Now, once again, it's going to look at the relationships we had formed, and it automatically joins them. And again, I only need the join for the items table, so I will remove the other miscellaneous options. See, once that join has been created, now I can define down here my inventory on hand. So let's step through this additional action we've created for this trigger. We have said on insert to the invoice table, I want to update my data being inserted, specifically these 2 fields with these static values, where this holds true. My quantity ordered is greater than my inventory on hand. Now, if we compare these two, this one will either run or this one will run. one of these two actions will run, because only one of the two of those could ever be true. They both can't be true at the same time. So I've essentially created, in one way to look at it, an if-else type behavior. Really, I'm just using the where clause to filter when the action runs. So let's go ahead and test this out. Once again, we validate our trigger. Give that a moment to validate, and we'll save it. Now, if I click save without clicking validate, it will run through the validation process. I myself am fairly methodical in that I always click validate and then save. That way I know it ran through. So let's take a look at our items data sheet and refresh this. So I still have 600 on hand of item A. And let's take a look at the invoice table. And we'll go ahead and remove that so it's clear. And we're going to create a new order. So what we're going to do first is let's order another 500, say 500 of item B. Run it. Well, I didn't see that checked. So let's check our item table. And there it is. It deducted it. So let's do another order and say John Doe here wanted to order more of item A. Say he orders 1,500, item A. What you'll see is as soon as that's submitted, it has checked the box that it was back ordered, stamped my static reason I had entered, and if I go to my items table and click refresh, you'll see it did not do the calculation. So my where clauses between the two are doing exactly what I wish them to do. Now, those are the two general use cases. The first one, showing how to do a calculation based on values from another table. The second one, going through and actually manipulating data in a different table on the insert. What I want to show you now is a combination of those two triggers we just built in a single trigger. So something that if all of them were combined would run at once. So we'll delete those and look at our triggered actions. I'm going to disable our existing. And what we're going to look at is this trigger here. On insert, I have an updated inventory. I'm totaling the cost, and I do have an option here of creating a change log. If you go and review our triggered action document on our how-to site, there is actually a video that goes through forming a change log very similar to this. The idea would be when the invoice changes, I'm writing a record, inserting a new record to a different table, a change log type table. So if you're interested in that use case, please review that video as well. But let's take a look at this trigger. So you can see many of these parts are going to be very, very similar to what we had before. So I have, once again, here's my action on insert. I'm updating my inserted table, making my back order true, and adding a back order reason for this where clause. If I scroll down, I see here's my other. I'm updating my items inventory on hand with, once again, our where clause. And at the bottom here, I have the update of the total cost, the data being inserted. And at the very, very bottom, my change log use case. Now you're going to see next to each of these action blocks a little icon here. This is a comment. I strongly recommend when you're starting to add a lot of different actions in one triggered action, that you add a little comment that just maybe is a breakdown of what it's to do. This simplifies a lot of times when you yourself need to come back to it after not looking at it for a little while. Maybe you create these and 6 months from now you come back and you want to change it. Having a nice little summary is always handy. Also, say a different developer comes on and they need to recreate some of your work. Please do them that favor and leave that comment in there for them. Now, you can also, while you're testing any of these triggered actions where you have multiple stacked, you can right-click on the block and actually choose to disable it. That's very, very handy when you're trying to maybe test only a certain action or a certain part of your triggered action. Makes it easy to actually go through and narrow in on where problems may be. So let's go ahead and we're going to look at this trigger and I'm going to turn it on. So if we enable this trigger, now let's take a look at all of what it does. So to summarize in general, I've got right now of my items, I've got 600 on hand of item A, 500 of B, and I still have a full stack of item C. So we're going to create. And let's say 400 item C. See, it did my calculation right here, and as well, it did my deduction right away. If we do one other test quickly, let's do 700 of item C. There's none on hand. It calculated my total cost, and in this case, it flagged it as back order. So that's a demonstration of showing how you can combine multiple triggers into a single behavior. Now, the last portion of this that I didn't show on it is as well, we had that change log. So if I look up here, you'll see previous there wasn't any, and you can check the timestamps, but it actually stamped in initial records for those on the insert. Like I said, that is actually available on our video on our how-to. So that's the brief run through I wanted to do today to show you the different use cases and implementations that are out there for our triggered actions. I would encourage you to play around with these features. They're very, very powerful, and they can simplify a lot of things you're looking to do. If you have any questions or get stuck on any of this, please reach out to our support team and let us know. And if you're looking for more one-on-one type training, you can reach out and we'll schedule a time with a support engineer so that they can run through your particular example and your use case. Thank you. Have a great evening.